Get the inside scoop with FT Senior Insider Ken Rosenthal. And Ken, let's start with a signing. 1 year, $5 million for Yoan Moncada, who has not played much lately and goes from the White Sox to the Angels. We might have Tim Anderson and Yoan Moncada as the starting shortstop and third baseman on opening day, being that I think Zach Neto is going to start the season late for the Angels. I was shocked to see the signing, but I want to get your thoughts.
The Angels know they can't count on Anthony Rendon to play third base, to be healthy. That hasn't worked out for them, right? So Moncada gets a chance here to really do some things. And what's interesting to me about this, guys, is to see the White Sox players outside of the White Sox environment. Now, obviously, Tim Anderson had some problems in his career, and there was some stuff he has referred to, personal things going on. Okay, and he got hurt. Moncada has also had some injuries, but Moncada, Eloy Jimenez, who's now with Tampa Bay, these guys maybe got too comfortable there. I'm not saying that for sure, but it's possible when you get a contract at a young age and you're the only organization you've ever known that can happen. So now their careers are at stake. Tim Anderson's is certainly at stake. Moncada too, and Eloy. So I'm interested to see how they do now where there's a different kind of motivation. They're all extremely talented. A couple of years ago, these guys were really well thought of in the game. And it seems to me that not all three of them lost it. We'll see which ones can bounce back.
And all three of them were on the 2021 postseason White Sox. Like it's not that long ago that this happened. Was there other interest in Moncada? Because $5 million seems like a price tag that is indicative to other interest.
There was other interest. And what was interesting about his situation is that he was waiting for Bregman. And that indicates to me that he had interest from some of the teams that are on Alex Bregman, whether it's Detroit, Chicago, Cubs, Boston Red Sox, Toronto, whoever those teams were. We know who those teams are. Houston's another one. And I don't know which teams specifically were after him, but he did have that interest. And eventually what I heard yesterday is that he just got tired of waiting for Bregman, and he wanted to make a decision, and he wanted to get going, and the Angels were there for him, and that's why he chose them.
Okay. I'll take us in a different direction. Owners meetings this week. You have a fresh column in The Athletic this morning about the salary cap, and I'll just preface my question with this. There's probably quite a few owners or sons of owners who now kind of control the team who either weren't really old enough to remember the 1994 strike and missed games or don't care. I don't know. But your thoughts on the salary cap conversations going on down in Florida this week?
What prompted me to write this column, Scott, were some public comments that have been made recently. Hal Steinbrenner was one. David Stearns had some things to say. And David Rubenstein, the Orioles owner. Now, in addition to those comments, I have heard privately from ownership types, people in the game, that this talk is just continuing, that the owners are eagerly looking forward, not all of them, but some of them, to a showdown with the union over a salary cap after the labor agreement expires December 1st, 2026. And the point of the column was just to say, okay, you guys want this? Do you really want to go back to where we were, losing games and being in the same situation the sport was in after the strike of 1994-95? The sport was in a horrible place. Fans were ticked off, and rightly so. And it took first Cal Ripken in 95 with the consecutive games record once play resumed. And then really the McGuire-Sosa home run chase, which we now know was tainted, in 98 for the sport to really recover. Now, some owners might believe, and some fans might believe, it's worth it to miss games, miss even a season to get a salary cap. To me, that's insane. And there is a reasonable discussion to be had about whether a salary cap would be good. That's an intellectual exercise. I have no problem with that discussion. The problem with that discussion is that the union is so adamantly opposed to a cap that what we're looking at, if the owners try to impose it, as they've tried to impose it virtually every labor negotiation, is a work stoppage. You're going to have a lockout. And again, at a time when the sport is finally entering a bit of a renaissance here, record revenues of $12.1 billion last year. $12.1 billion. Don't tell me the sport is broken. Tell me how to fix the legitimate problem that exists in revenue disparity between the large market and small market teams. There are ways to do it without a cap. Some of the owners don't want to think about it. They just want the cap. It's the easiest solution for them, and so be it. But what I intended to do with that column was kind of just send out a warning. This is not good. We should not be thinking this way. I know people are thinking this way, and I'm not going to change their minds, obviously, but I just felt that it needed to be said.
Yeah, it was great. And I mean, if we force teams to use revenue and revenue sharing on player payroll, which they say they can't afford, that would also be pretty effective. There's not really severe rules in place besides the thought of a grievance if a team's getting out of control on that front. So I want to read a portion of a comment from your column in The Athletic, because I do love to dive into the comments a little bit, because I think this is where fans are split. Some fans are educated and realize that their team is not carrying the weight, okay? And then here's the other side where the smear campaign happens. This fan goes, I'm a fan of a team that is way below my $125 million. Oh, because he wants there to be a floor of 125 mil and a cap of like low 200s. He said, my team has no shot. I have no interest in attending their games and spending money when the owner does not spend money to improve. It's going to get good. Watch. In fact, to give you a hint, my team was the worst team in baseball history last year and actually cut payroll this year. And the ticket office has the gall to continue to call me to buy tickets. In closing, honestly, I hope a lockout after the 26th season because he wants this to get fixed. I'm reading this thinking it's going to be one of these other teams. And I'm like, the Chicago White Sox, that's who this fan is going for here and is shilling for?
Now, the White Sox, Scott, don't have a revenue problem, or at least they shouldn't. They have an ownership problem, and that is where this starts. Now, for a number of teams, and I kind of addressed this in the column, a new ownership class would be welcome, and we're seeing some different kinds of owners coming into the game, some private equity types, not necessarily going to be spending aggressively. We don't know, but they have money, right? So with the Chicago White Sox, with other clubs, it is an ownership problem. Now, I'm not dismissing, and fans often get confused when I write these things. I'm not dismissing the problems that do exist. They are legitimate problems. Pittsburgh and Cleveland, for example, cannot compete the way the New York Mets and Los Angeles Dodgers can, or at least they cannot spend the way those teams do. But there are other low-revenue teams, Tampa Bay, Milwaukee, Cleveland is actually one of them, that compete very well despite the restrictions that they're under. So the answer to me is to help those teams further. Now, you do that maybe through draft and giving them more picks, better positions. You could do that. You do that through different kinds of revenue sharing, and specifically what I mentioned in the column would be making the luxury tax penalties at the top even steeper, because those teams get 50% of the luxury tax proceeds, or about 50%. And there are other things as well, including a floor, that should be considered. There are a lot of levers to be pulled here without going to the extreme of a salary cap that would only lead to a work stoppage. So what I'm hoping is that this is the typical saber rattling, the beating of the drums that takes place before every CBA negotiation, and that eventually cooler heads will prevail. But what concerns me is the talk, at least in my recollection, has started even sooner this time, and the talk is even more vehement among certain ownership types about getting this salary cap done. And again, you want to take the sport down a bad path? Be my guest, go do it. It's not healthy. It's not a good thing.
We had Jim Bowden on just the other day, and he talked about being in those owners' meetings when his owner was suspended for the year. Is there a clear delineation between this group of owners and that group of owners? Like, is it like, well, the teams that are in the smallest markets are all on this side of salary cap argument, and the teams in the biggest are on the other side?
It's not that clear. And there are times, Eric, where there's some crossover, I guess you would call it. I am quite confident saying there are certain large market teams that would want a salary cap. Actually, all owners probably would want a salary cap because it limits their spending, right? Kind of saves them from themselves, which is what the owners have always asked the players to do for them. Save us from ourselves. So it's complicated, of course. And the commissioner has an idea now about kind of bringing the television packages, all the streaming packages under one umbrella, the league's umbrella. And with that, if you had that, then perhaps you could justify a cap to the larger market teams. It's complicated. I don't know how it would work. I don't know why the large market teams would give up their competitive advantage that way, but maybe to get a cap, they would. So I don't know where it's going, but it's not always as clear as large market versus small market. And in terms of if you polled all 30 owners about whether they want a cap, I expect all 30 would say yes. Now the question is how to get it in place and whether it's actually practical. And my point is, in this particular argument is that it's not practical.
Ken, I would have you read it, but I'm sure you don't have your own article pulled up. The last 3 sentences, I'm going to read it for you, so hopefully it doesn't feel like literature cannibalism by me reading your own writing here, but it's you said in the last 3 sentences of your article, it was tremendous. Their sky is falling, quote, sky is falling act is already growing tiresome. Fix the sport some other way. Or sell your damn team. That was just the best way to finish the article. So I appreciate that, Ken.
Oh, thanks, Erik. And again, these are complicated conversations that have to take place because the economics of the sport are complex. They're difficult because you have a sport that has 30 franchises in which the primary revenue driver is local revenue. It's not like the NFL when you have a national television contract and that is the primary revenue. Here, it's local and markets obviously are not equal in size. I don't know that the sport is a competitive problem as much as it has a revenue disparity problem. And I guess it's always going to have that. It's kind of hard to get around. But again, a salary cap, you might think it's an answer, but it's an answer that's going to bring the sport to a place where it doesn't want to be. And I remember the strike of 1994-95, and I remember how ticked off fans were, and I remember how difficult it was to kind of get back going again for the sport in terms of revenue and popularity, all of that. You can make the argument that the sport has never fully recovered. I don't know that I would go that far. If you have a stoppage in which part or all of a season is lost in 2027, it's going to be a big problem for a sport that, again, I'm going to repeat it, $12.1 billion in revenue last season, and that was a record.
Unbelievable. Talking about money, Pete Alonso finally got signed with the Mets. Now on to, I think, the biggest name that's still out there, Alex Bregman. There's been talks of him maybe going back to Houston. What is the latest you've heard on him? And will we be hearing a signing here pretty soon?
Todd, the answer to that question, actually both questions, is I don't know. Now, I can tell you what I've heard. What I've heard consistently are the same teams. It's the Cubs, it's the Tigers, it's the Red Sox, the Blue Jays, and the Astros. Those are the teams that have had some level of interest. Now, let's go one by one. The Astros have their offer out there. It was 6 years, 156. It is reported that they went up a little bit and it still wasn't good enough. Okay, that's one team. The Cubs, I don't believe they have the willingness or the financial flexibility from their owner to go 6 years. Tigers, I don't believe they want to go 6 years because they're sitting on Javi Baez's contract and it's an albatross, and that is informing their thinking, maybe not the right way, but it is, on Bregman. The Red Sox, they need a right-handed bat. They've needed a right-handed bat since last year, and I do not know, and I cannot figure out, other than financial restrictions, why they have not been more aggressive on that front. They could use Bregman. The Tigers could use Bregman. The Cubs could use Bregman. The Blue Jays, of course, could use him as well, and maybe they're a team that would go 6 years, and maybe, like Alonso, like Soto, and like others, he just is not willing to go there. But the question now for me is, does Bregman end up somewhat like Alonso, shorter deal with opt-outs, what Scott Boras, the agent, calls a bridge contract that has worked for some and not for others? Or does Bregman ultimately get the 6-year offers that we keep hearing about, 6 or 7 years? That's where this is going to turn or hinge. Now, when he gets a 6-year offer and it's reported, that means nothing to me. It could be 6 years, $60 million. It's not something he's taking. Now, I'm not saying it is, but my point is, even if he has 6 years, if he doesn't have the right dollars, it doesn't matter. So again, that to me is the real question here. Does Bregman end up with the length of deal that he wants, or does he end up with one of these shorter bridge contracts with the early opt-outs and the ability to go back into the market again?
All right, we just followed all the crumbs around in a circle for Bregman. Does all this lead to something with Arenado? Nolan Arenado's still sitting there in St. Louis? Because now you hear possibly these teams. Does it lead to something like almost immediately afterwards?
That's a good question. I don't know about immediately, Eric, but certainly these two players are linked. And Arenado needs Bregman to pick a spot. If Bregman goes to, say, Detroit, well, then Boston is open for Arenado. If Boston is interested, and it's not exactly clear how interested they are. And of course, this will be a negotiation with the Cardinals about how much money they would be picking up. And it would be a negotiation with Arenado, who has a no-trade clause. Boston is a team where he would like to play. I would expect that if the Yankees got involved, he'd be willing to play for the Yankees. And of course, they have a question now of who is going to be in their infield with Jazz Chisholm either at third or second. There are probably other teams he would go to at this point because he does want out. But the question then becomes, okay, are those teams viable? And would he really, in the end, say yes? So, yes, Bregman's situation does have an effect on Arenado's. And I expect that Bregman will need to be resolved first in one way or another before Arenado can be resolved. Now, it's possible, I guess, thinking out loud here, that if Boston eventually signals to Arenado, listen, we're not doing Bregman, let's go, then Arenado could go first. But we're sitting here with this giant staring match between the teams and Bregman, the Cardinals and Arenado, and all these things going on. And right now it's February 7th. The first camps are opening this weekend, and these two guys are still out there.
It is exhausting. Okay, let's finish with this. Criminal case comes to an end. Ippei, Shohei Ohtani's interpreter, receives a good chunk of time in prison. He asked for 18 months. He ends up getting 57 months. Just final thoughts, really, because I don't think we're going to be bringing up this case too much more after this.
Well, I continue to hear from people, mostly on social media, but even friends of mine, who say, I don't get it, man. There's no way Shohei couldn't have known. Something's fishy. And listen, from the outside, absolutely, this is a weird deal. And yeah, something was fishy. However, do we have proof of any of it? No. And if you're saying to me, Ippei just took the fall for Shohei, they're taking care of him, really? He's going to spend almost 5 years in jail, or at least that's what his sentence is going to be. We have a government report that was pretty airtight about Ippei's activities. We have no evidence, none, literally none, that anything untoward has taken place. So when you tell me, Ken, you guys aren't doing a good job reporting, something happened here, yeah, I get it. That's fine. But show me the evidence. Show me anywhere where there's been evidence that this is anything but Ippei stealing from Shohei. And believe me, reporters, including myself, were really checking into this and trying to do our best to figure out what went on here, to figure out if anything was truly linked to Shohei. And obviously, we never have found anything. Maybe in time, somebody will, but you've got the government report, you've got the sentence, you've got the audio tape of Ippei talking to the bank, impersonating Shohei. Maybe it's time for us to just accept that this guy stole from Shohei, and that's how it went down. And Shohei, and I wrote about this last July, he is oblivious. He is baseball only, and he is the kind of person, maybe the only kind of person, for whom this could have happened to without him knowing.
Yeah, I mean, if everyone thinks they were in on something together, Ippei was even taking shots at Ohtani in his letter to the judge, and the judge said yesterday how it was a really rude and misled letter. So I'm like, wow, they really played it up all the way to him getting his prison sentence and that kind of affecting things. I'm like, I love me a good conspiracy theory in baseball, Ken, but this one just, it doesn't add up to get there.
Again, and I'm inviting anyone out there. If they've got the evidence, you know where to find me. I'm easily accessible. Bring it to me and I'll go look at it. I have not gotten any communications along those lines. And when we checked,
Ken,
we got nothing.
You're not in Jersey anymore, Ken. I can't help you out, buddy.
My heart's still there, Todd.
All right, that's all that matters. That's it.
And hey, Ken's done some good investigative reporting in the past, so you can look back. There's plenty of stories. But Ken, thank you for the time. Good to see you. We'll catch you on Monday on Fair Territory.
Thanks, guys.